Investigating war crimes in Afghanistan, the ICC has now cleared the way for an inquiry into the allegations, and the US is angry. So, can justice be done in this war-torn country? And are politics at play? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Peter Dobbie. The International Criminal Court has authorised an investigation into possible war crimes committed in Afghanistan. An appeal by the ICC's chief prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, was approved after being rejected last year. Accusations of atrocities committed by US soldiers, the Taliban and Afghan forces will now be investigated. The torture of prisoners, sexual violence and the indiscriminate mass killing of civilians are among the claims the ICC wants to look into. But the US does not recognise the court's authority, and the White House has even imposed a travel ban on its judges. Peter Hofmanski, the judge presiding over the appeals chamber, defended that ruling, saying the case meets all the right criteria.
That in support of her request for authorization of investigation into the situation in Afghanistan, the prosecutor presented information relating to numerous incidents which, in her view, established a reasonable basis that crime under the jurisdiction of the court have been committed.
Well, that decision angered the US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo.
This is a truly breathtaking action by an unaccountable political institution masquerading as a legal body. It is all the more reckless for this ruling to come just days after the United States signed a historic peace deal on Afghanistan, which is the best chance for peace in a generation. The United States is not a party to the ICC, and we will take all necessary measures to protect our citizens from this renegade, unlawful so-called court.
Well, the US has long seen the ICC as a threat to its sovereignty. In 2018, the former US National Security Advisor, John Bolton, lashed out saying this: "We won't cooperate with the ICC, we'll provide no assistance to the ICC, and we certainly will not join the ICC. We will let the ICC die on its own," adding that if the court comes after us, we will not sit quietly. OK, let's bring in our guests. Joining us today from Kabul, we have Mushtaq Rahim. He's a founding member of the think tank, the Afghanistan Affairs Unit. In Washington, we have Shafiq Hamdam, formerly an advisor to NATO's senior civilian representative in Afghanistan. And in Amsterdam, we have Kevin John Heller. He's a law professor at the University of Amsterdam and the Australian National University. Welcome to you all. Mushtaq Rahim in Kabul, coming to you first. What are the chances at some point in the next year, say, we see somebody from the Taliban, somebody from the United States security apparatus, or indeed somebody from the Afghan military in court at the ICC?
First of all, let's look at the Afghan conflict. This discussion starting from 2001, does it cover the whole period of the conflict? The Afghan conflict started in 1978-79, and since then there have been numerous abuses of human rights, gross violations of the violations of human rights. There have been war crimes and throughout these last 4 decades. So starting from 2001, the first question will be, does it satisfy all those who are advocating for the transitional justice in Afghanistan? I don't think that's happening with starting point they're selected as 2001, because before that we had significant events taking place. Now, coming back to your question, 2001 and onwards, first of all, we all know that the American administration, America is not the signatory to the ICC, and they have earlier tried to block this whole investigation. Also, yesterday, Secretary Pompeo raised his concerns about this whole exercise. Next 1 or 2 years, I'm not very much optimistic that things will move that fast. I can also tell you that in the past, some actions were taken. Even the reports were not allowed to be released by the Afghan parliament, by the government. The Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission has had a significant exercise over the period of 5 to 6 years where they mapped
those are accusations that have been circulating for a good couple of weeks now, Mushtaq. So I just want to broaden out the discussion to bring in our two other guests. Shafiq Hamdam, Mushtaq Rahim in Kabul raises a valid point, doesn't he? If the US very aggressively chooses not to recognise the ICC, what's the point?
I think it was very clear from the beginning. The United States even warned the members if they try to open the investigation, they will be blocked even entering the United States. And since this news came out, the State Department is aggressively going against them. And of course, as Mushtaq said, the United States is not party, but Afghanistan is party to ICC. And the Independent Human Rights Commission chairwoman, she welcomed the decision. And I'm aware that the Afghan government is also not fully involved in this recent investigation. Or I would also say what happens at this very critical moment where we are talking about peace, reconciliation, negotiation, release of prisoners. Right now, like almost 5,000 prisoners who have been accused of killing people, exploding bombs in Afghanistan, and I would say even war crimes. These are the 5,000 people that Taliban asked to be released. And then the United States has agreed to the Taliban that these 5,000 Taliban will be released. So in such a situation where there's on one side, there's peace negotiation, and on another side, ICC opened this investigation, I think it's damaging. I know for sure we cannot compromise legal means for political means. There has to be processes, but Afghanistan unfortunately has been suffering from injustice for the last 4 decades. My family member has been buried alive. We have learned after 30 years, you know, they are no longer alive, and they have been buried alive. So there has been a transitional justice process in Afghanistan which has been blocked by the United States as well as Afghan parties who were involved. So I think there will be significant pushback from Afghan people as well.
Okay, Kevin John Heller in Amsterdam. There are accusations in the New York Times this week that the Trump administration has been actively trying to intimidate members of the lower court at the ICC. Can we stand that up in any way, or is it something that you think we shouldn't be giving any credence to at all?
Well, you know, I certainly am not privy to kind of any insider information about what the U.S. is or isn't doing kind of at the personal level. But there's no question that the U.S. has been extremely belligerent toward the court, going well beyond any of the hostility we ever saw, even from previous Republican administrations. I mean, certainly the Bush administration never tried to actually block visas of the court's prosecutor, didn't threaten to freeze the assets of, you know, investigators and prosecutors from the court. So it's quite clear that the U.S. is going to do everything they can to prevent the ICC from investigating at least Americans in the near future.
OK. Mushtaq Rahim in Kabul, going back to your earlier point about we've got to get the parameters of the court set in stone, I guess, because Afghanistan hit the front pages in the events after 9/11. The court was set up in perpetuity, I guess, in 2002. The Afghan line, the official Afghan government line, however, is this: operating within those parameters, it cannot serve justice doing what it wants to do.
This is what I'm saying. This is, I already said that if you start from post 9/11 era, what will happen to before that, where we had mass killings, alive burial of people, we had during the civil war in Afghanistan, during which the warring parties did mass killing, and also heavy toll was taken by the women of Afghanistan. The general public suffered significantly, and there are recorded cases of abuse of human rights. There are images and videos of those mass atrocities. If those are not covered, I think this is justice incomplete. And justice incomplete will not serve the purpose of helping Afghanistan to transition from the conflict into a just society. Because half a justice is, I don't know how much purpose will it serve. So that will remain a question.
Shafiq in Washington, How would this impact the very recent Doha deal that saw the Taliban and the United States saying, yes, there is a way forward to peace in Afghanistan?
I think it may impact, but not heavily, because all the parties are involved in this case. If there is charges, it will be against the Taliban, it will be against the United States, as well as the Afghan government. So therefore, I believe from all sides, there will be kind of pushback. And just to, tell you a story about the transitional justice in Afghanistan, which has been ongoing since almost 18 years. The process, the report, the investigation has been completed, and it has not been released from the Independent Human Rights Commission. It has been saved and blocked since ever, and nobody has been even talking about that. So that's more of internal things. If such an international court will start investigation, I'm certain neither the Afghan government nor the United States or Taliban will allow that investigation to happen. It may damage the peace process. It might be more of a political pushback, but I don't expect any justice through this court. And of course, unfortunately, we have been witness the Balkan cases, and the Serbians and Kosovos and Bosnia-Herzegovina and a lot of other areas where the ICC tried to deliver justice, but it was more of a drama than delivering justice.
Kevin John Heller in Amsterdam, the point there that Shafiq raises about what happened in the aftermath of the terrible events in the Balkans in the 1990s, why should the peace deal between the United States and the Taliban impact what the ICC may or may not end up doing with Afghanistan at all? Because that process, that legal process, will take years and years and years. And the people that signed the peace deal in Doha, if it holds, they'll be dead and buried, perhaps, by the time there's a final chapter in the ICC legal process.
Well, the first thing to point out is that the ICC had absolutely nothing to do with the justice in the Balkans. That was the Yugoslav tribunal set up by the Security Council. The ICC didn't even exist at that point. The ICC is only dealing with events that take place after 2002, when the Rome Statute entered into force. So maybe the justice is imperfect, but it's the only justice the ICC can give. Now, whether the ICC will somehow undermine the peace deal, it could complicate it somewhat. I think your point is very well taken that the investigations, even if they're successful, will take considerable amount of time, and we should measure that probably in years, not in months. But it's also important to remember that the ICC, even if it is successful in Afghanistan, will only be prosecuting a very small number of perpetrators. It will only be prosecuting the most high-level, most responsible perpetrators. And there's no reason why the US and the Afghanistan government and the Taliban can't enter into peace negotiations and prisoner swaps at those lower levels. The ICC has nothing to say about how these various parties are dealing with the less responsible perpetrators.
Shafiq Hamdan in Washington, there is, however, already, we're told, in operation, a special unit set up in Afghanistan by Afghanistan. For you, could that do as good a job as the ICC or not?
I don't think so, because in a situation right now in Afghanistan, basic human rights are not respected. Where there is violence, as we are speaking right now, unfortunately, a few hours ago, there was an attack, and more than 27 people have been killed and more than 50 people have been wounded. And so far, nobody has been responsible for that, or might be later on ISIS or another group will claim responsibility. So right now in Afghanistan, we are talking even about very basic human rights. Forget about major criminals. For example, if we talk about the major criminals, and if they cannot be obstacle, I would say the apparatus in the government, the leadership in the government, they are part of these major criminals. The Minister of Defense is accused, the first Vice President of Afghanistan is accused, and the President himself also been accused by the armed Taliban for civilian casualties. And of course, General Dostum, who was his ex-Vice President, he was in the list. His current Vice President in the new ticket, Mr. Abdullah Saleh, is also accused. The Minister of Defense is accused. So there is a big list of people who have been accused for war crimes, and therefore I believe that there is no willingness within the Afghan government, and there is no power within the ICC to execute any such action.
And Mushtaq Rahim in Kabul, to pick up on that point from Shafiq Hamdan in Washington, being charged and then being discovered, being found, being detained, being arrested and going on trial. Those are very, very different things. So if everyone involved in this who doesn't like it, if they're actually scared of the symbolism of this, names being symbolically charged, people being symbolically charged, why is that symbolism so significant?
See, the issue of transitional justice has always been something that the political elite has always tried to keep away from the discussion. It has only been the human rights advocates and those advocating for transitional justice in Afghanistan. The second point is that these political elites name they have been accused of engaged in the war atrocities. So the ones who are accused are the ones who have been in power for last at least 18 years. But throughout the Afghan conflict, they have been holding the aces in the whole conflict. And that has been the reason that they have been able to keep the human rights advocates at bay. They have not allowed any moves in this regard. Let me remind you another thing. In mid-2000s, the Afghan parliament, when it was dominated by these actors of the Afghan conflict, they passed a bill where they issued a blanket amnesty for all those who were engaged in the civil war in regard to the transitional justice, which was then contested by the human rights activists and which was revised by the Afghan president, Hamid Karzai, that issues of at the individual level cannot have an amnesty, but in general, the parties and the groups cannot be tried as part of the transitional justice. So this effort has been there, and as far as symbolism is concerned, there have been cases in the past in other parts of the world where symbolism has really then later on turned into actual action against those people.
Okay.
We have seen Charles Taylor being tried, some others as well.
Understood. Kevin in Amsterdam. Is what we're seeing over this whole Afghan question, therefore, a walking, talking demonstration of the way that some people are saying the ICC needs more teeth? It needs more judges, more prosecutors, more funding. It needs the big powers at the United Nations to really get behind it so it can put in multiple investigations at the same time.
I mean, I think that's undeniably true. The court is, I think, incredibly symbolically important. I think it's extremely symbolically important that the appeals chamber has affirmed the ICC's right to investigate crimes committed by the Afghan government and even more kind of dramatically by Americans. But it is still fundamentally a court that is dependent upon its own resources and, even more importantly, the cooperation of state parties and non-state parties. And it has really struggled because states have simply not agreed to help it obtain evidence, to track down perpetrators and arrest them. It suffers from the fact that it wasn't created by the Security Council in the same way that the Yugoslav and the Rwanda tribunals. It doesn't have the teeth that it needs to be effective, particularly when it's taking on a major power like the United States.
And Shafiq in Washington, is what we're seeing as well at the moment something of a Rubicon when it comes to Washington's attitude? Because officially, if one was to boil down the Trump administration's attitude and Barack Obama's attitude towards the ICC, they're not that dissimilar. But the vociferous aspect of the denial, the anger, the we are not going to get involved with this at all, that is so much stronger.
I believe there is a legitimate reason for that because they are not party to ICC. But let's not forget that the case in Afghanistan is very complicated. Even the strong member of ICC and advocates for human and anti-war issues, they are also part of Afghanistan conflict, and they have been in Afghanistan for the last 18 years. For example, I will list some countries like France, like Germany, UK, even Netherlands. They all have been part of that 18 years of war, at least for the 14 years or 13 years under ISAF in Afghanistan. So I think United States is speaking out because it's not party to that. But when it comes to the action, implementation, and support, I would assume that these other member states also, because they have stake in Afghanistan's war, then they may also not be very much supportive. That's why I'm not very optimistic that this will take us to a conclusion.
Mushtaq Rahim in Kabul, if we're talking realistically now about a situation where nobody involved in the Afghan conflict, going back 40 years, say, ends up in a court at The Hague, What's the signal that sends out to the innocent civilians who lost everything or came very close to losing everything?
Look, the problem in Afghanistan is definitely this will satisfy the victims of the conflict. But don't forget that Afghanistan is also fragmented on ethnocentric lines. And unfortunately, most of these people who are accused or could be indicted in this whole exercise, those who have been killed in action in the past are declared as heroes, and those who are alive, they are revered to highest extent. Going in towards implementation of transitional justice and looking at the ideal scenario of these guys, the leadership ending up in the ICC court can cause agitation and problems, political instability in Afghanistan. So don't forget that aspect. But definitely, we all believe that without justice, there cannot be a positive peace. And without a positive peace, the peace cannot be complete. So we have to think of different alternative ways. Second point is that ICC might be looking to fulfill its agenda from 2001 and try to take those people, the highest leadership, to the Court of Justice. But what about at the grassroots level, injustices that has happened, that will be challenging the stability of Afghanistan. Unfortunately, we have never had a real discussion about a roadmap vis-a-vis the transitional justice in Afghanistan. Retributive justice can be one thing that we can think of, but what about restorative justice? What about reconciliation? That can also satisfy the victims of the Afghan conflict.
I think, Mushtaq, that's maybe a slightly different discussion for another Inside Story. Shafiq Hamdam in Washington. Does what we've been discussing today put the ICC, the Taliban, Washington, and the Afghan government on a big collision course?
I think the peace process will continue. Things will go as it is. There might be some pressure as we are speaking right now in this very critical time. I would say, this would have been better to discuss about peace in this program. So these are kind of things that will be taken away from the peace process. But certainly the government, the Taliban, the United States, and I think for the Afghan people right now, the priority is peace and ending the war. When it comes to justice, of course, we should not compromise justice. There is still time, especially for transitional justice, and especially for the justice that ICC would like to deliver, and that will require a government which is fully independent, people who are not involved in the war crimes, and they should have the willingness and political support as well as people support to support this process.
Let me just very briefly put one last thought to Kevin John Heller in Amsterdam. Kevin, is it accurate to say that all three of you can see the legal value in going to the ICC and the way the ruling has played to the ICC, but the reality is there are so many huge obstacles and a lack of willingness on the part of everyone? The reality is it possibly won't ever happen.
I think that's an undeniable risk, and I think the ICC goes into the situation with its eyes open about the difficulties. But by the same token, I don't want to be completely pessimistic and negative either. Will the ICC be able to credibly investigate Americans? Probably not. Will it struggle to investigate high-level Afghan government officials? Probably. But I think the Taliban are actually in quite a different category. They certainly don't have the kind of protections that a major powerful government has, and to at least some extent, the Afghan government has an incentive in facilitating an ICC investigation into the Taliban. So, if anyone ends up at the dock of the ICC in the near future, and near kind of flexibly understood, we could easily see, I think, a Taliban leader ending up in The Hague facing charges. I don't think that's out of the question.
Gentlemen, we have to leave it there. Thank you to our guests. They were Mushtaq Rahim, Shafiq Hamdam, and Kevin John Heller. And thank you to you too for your company. You can see the show again anytime via the website, aljazeera.com. And for more discussion, do go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also follow the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Peter Dobbie, and the entire team here in Doha. Thanks for watching. I will see you very soon. Bye-bye.